The truth doesn't shout, it waits, and when the moment is exactly right, it steps forward, and nothing can stop it.
You need to leave this seat. Right now. Those words cut through the entire cabin like a knife, through silk. Sharp. Cold. Deliberate. Sir, I will not ask you again. This section is not for you. The elderly man didn't move. Not because he was being difficult. Not because he was confused. He didn't move because he absolutely knew, that he had done nothing wrong. His hands were steady on his armrests. His breathing was controlled. But his eyes told a completely different story. Behind those deep brown eyes was a man who had spent 68 years learning exactly what this moment felt like. And he had prayed, genuinely prayed, that today would not be one of those days. But here she was anyway. The flight attendant stood over him with that smile. That particular smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind of smile that's really just a weapon wearing a disguise. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings. Passengers turned their heads. Some pulled out their phones slowly, unsure. Others just watched. The way people watch something uncomfortable, wanting it to stop, but not quite willing to be the one to stop it. And then, from 3 rows back, from a window seat near the left side of the cabin, a small voice broke through the tension like a single crack of light under a door. He didn't do anything wrong. The flight attendant's eyes snapped sideways. Standing in the aisle, barely tall enough to see over the headrests, was a 10-year-old boy in a neat blue sweater, wearing glasses, watching everything with calm, careful eyes that belonged to someone far, far older than 10. "Stay out of this," she said. Her voice was still polished, still professional, but there was something else underneath it now, something she hadn't expected to feel. "This doesn't concern you." The boy held her gaze. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. And then he said something that nobody on that plane was prepared for. "You think you know what happened here?" he said quietly. "You have absolutely no idea." 3 hours earlier, Gate 14 of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was exactly what you'd expect on a Tuesday morning in late October. Busy. Loud. The kind of organized chaos that somehow still works. Rolling suitcases. Coffee cups. Gate agents calling final boarding. A woman arguing politely with a ticket scanner. A toddler running in circles while his father tried to fold a stroller. And in the middle of all of it, a 10-year-old boy pressed his forehead against the floor-to-ceiling window and stared at the planes on the tarmac with the kind of reverence most people reserve for cathedrals. His name was Ethan Carter. And from the moment his mother had told him they were flying to visit his grandmother in Chicago, he had been counting down the days like it was Christmas. Ethan was not a typical 10-year-old, though he would never say that about himself because Ethan was also not the kind of kid who thought he was special. He was the kind of kid who thought everything else was special. The way shadows moved. The way people's faces changed when they thought no one was looking. The way a conversation could shift an entire room without a single person noticing the shift happening. He noticed everything. His mother, Danielle Carter, stood a few feet behind him, scrolling through something on her phone with the half-distracted ease of a woman who is used to managing approximately 11 things simultaneously. Danielle was a registered nurse. 12-hour shifts. Night rotations. The kind of work that makes you either fall apart or become completely unshakable. Danielle had chosen the second option a long time ago, and it showed in the way she carried herself. Straight spine, measured voice, eyes that assessed a room the same way they assessed a patient. Quickly, thoroughly, without panic. She glanced up at Ethan and smiled. "You're going to fog up the glass." "I know," he said without moving. She laughed softly and went back to her phone. Ethan adjusted his glasses. They were new to him. His uncle Marcus had given them to him 4 months ago. Marcus was an engineer, the kind of man who collected gadgets the way other people collected memories, and when he'd handed Ethan those glasses in their slim black case, his eyes had gone wide with the particular joy of a grown man who has found the perfect person to appreciate a perfect gift. "These," Marcus had said, "are smart glasses. They record video and audio. Crystal clear. Up to 6 hours of footage. Stored right here in the left temple. You can review it later through the app." Ethan had worn them every day since. Not because he was trying to spy on anyone, That wasn't it at all. Ethan wore them because he'd seen too many moments disappear. Too many things happen in front of people who then looked away and said they hadn't seen anything. He'd watched videos online. His mother thought he was too young for some of them, but she'd sat with him anyway, talking through each one, of people being treated unfairly in airports, in stores, in restaurants. And the pattern he noticed every single time was this: the person doing the harm always counted on there being no proof. Ethan had decided, quietly and privately, that he would always have proof. He wasn't angry about it. He wasn't carrying it like a wound. He was simply prepared. The way his mother had taught him to be prepared. The way she had taught him that staying calm was not the same as doing nothing. The truth doesn't always shout, she had told him once, when he was 8, after something happened at school that she hadn't been able to fix but had held him through anyway. Sometimes it waits, quietly, and then when the moment is exactly right, it steps forward, and nothing can stop it. He had never forgotten that. Now, as the gate agent announced pre-boarding for their flight, first class and passengers requiring extra assistance, Danielle tucked her phone away and touched Ethan's shoulder.
Come on, baby.
That's us. They joined the short queue, boarding passes ready, carry-on luggage neat, and organized the way Danielle organized everything, efficiently, with no wasted energy. That's when Ethan first noticed Mr. Hayes. He was standing a few people ahead of them in the line.
Tall, even at 68.
Silver hair, close-cropped. A pressed charcoal suit that looked like it had been chosen very carefully for this particular trip. He was holding his boarding pass in both hands, the way you hold something you're slightly afraid to lose, glancing at it every few seconds as if confirming that yes, it was still real. There was something about him that made Ethan pay attention. Not something strange. Something quiet. Something like a man experiencing a moment he had been waiting a very long time for. Mr. Leonard Hayes had spent 41 years working for the city of Memphis. Water treatment facilities. He had started at the bottom, as a junior technician at 27, and worked his way up patiently and without drama until he was overseeing operations for the entire Eastern District. He had put his daughter through college. He had taken care of his wife, Gloria, through 7 years of illness, sitting with her every evening in the hospital during her final months, reading to her from the books she loved. He had buried her in the spring. And then one morning in September, he had sat at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold in front of him and realized that he had been taking care of everyone and everything for his entire life and had never, not once, done something purely, extravagantly, for himself. Gloria had always wanted them to fly first class. She used to cut pictures out of travel magazines and stick them to the refrigerator.
Wide seats.
Real glassware. White tablecloths. Someday, Lenny, she used to say. He always said someday. He had booked the ticket 3 days after that morning at the kitchen table. First class. Atlanta to Chicago. He was going to visit his old college roommate. He was going to sit in that wide seat and have a real drink in a real glass, and he was going to close his eyes and tell Gloria he had finally gotten there. He had checked his ticket 6 times that morning before leaving the house. As he stepped up to hand his boarding pass to the gate agent, the scanner beeped green and the agent smiled, warmly, genuinely, and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hayes. Enjoy your flight." He nodded, thanked her quietly, and stepped through the jetway with his shoulders just slightly straighter than before. Ethan watched him go. Then he adjusted his glasses and followed his mother through the door. The plane was a wide-body aircraft, clean and cool and smelling of that specific combination of recycled air and synthetic upholstery that is somehow universal to every airplane that has ever flown. First class occupied the front 2 rows, wide seats, real overhead space, the whole arrangement that made economy feel like a different universe. Mr. Hayes found a seat, 2A window, and settled into it with the careful deliberateness of a man trying not to disrupt anything. He placed his jacket neatly in the overhead compartment. He sat down. He rested his hands on the armrests. And then he looked out the window, and for just a moment, his face opened completely. Just a flash of it. Pure, unguarded wonder. The kind of joy that doesn't perform itself. The kind that just exists. Ethan, passing down the aisle toward row 5, caught that expression. He filed it away the way he filed everything away. Quietly.
Carefully.
For later, the boarding process continued. The cabin filled. People arranged themselves and their belongings with varying degrees of success. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, greeting passengers, checking overhead bins, offering pre-departure beverages. There were 3 of them working this section of the plane. 2 were efficient and pleasant in that practiced, professional way that good flight attendants have. The 3rd was Claire Whitmore. Ethan noticed her the way he noticed most things, not immediately but steadily. She had the right smile, the practiced warmth, the gestures of attentiveness. But Ethan had spent years watching his mother with patience and had learned something important. There is a difference between care that comes from inside a person and care that has been applied to the outside of a person like a coat of paint. One of those things is warm. The other, if you look carefully enough, has edges. She came through first class with a tray of orange juice and water, distributing them with practiced ease. When she reached 2A, she paused. Just for a half second, the kind of pause most people wouldn't catch. But Ethan caught it. He watched her register Mr. Hayes, watched her register his seat, watched something flicker across her face that was gone before it fully arrived. She handed him his orange juice. He thanked her politely. She moved on. Ethan leaned back in his seat in row 5 and chewed his thumbnails slowly, the way he always did when he was processing something. His mother looked over at him. "You okay?"
Yeah, he said.
"Just thinking." She knew that look. She said nothing and let him think. The cabin doors closed. The safety announcement played. The plane began its slow push back from the gate, and outside the window the terminal receded, and the wide gray tarmac of the airport opened up around them, and the morning sky was pale blue and enormous. Everything, in those first quiet minutes after takeoff, seemed perfectly fine. But Ethan's glasses were already recording, and the tiny light on the left temple blinked once, softly, in the dimness of the cabin, capturing everything. If you can already feel where this is going, hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next is going to make your jaw drop. We're just getting started. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed something unfair happen in public and wish someone had stepped in? Tell us your story. The flight had been in the air for just under 40 minutes when the atmosphere in first class began to change. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about tension, the real kind, the kind that roots itself in a room and grows. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in quietly, like cold air under a door, and by the time you notice it, it's already everywhere. Mr. Hayes had finished his orange juice and ordered a coffee when the drinks cart came through. He had accepted a warm mixed nut snack with a slight nod and a "thank you very much" that was both gracious and completely unnecessary, the kind of excessive politeness that some people develop as a survival mechanism and then can never quite put down. He had arranged his tray table neatly. He had gazed out the window at the white carpet of clouds 37,000 feet below them. He had looked genuinely, quietly, deeply happy. Ethan, watching from row 5 with a ginger ale he wasn't really drinking, had felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe that half-second pause from Claire Whitmore had been nothing. Maybe he had been looking for patterns that weren't there. His mother was reading on her tablet, earbuds in, completely absorbed. Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit was on his laptop. The cabin hummed with that particular in-flight stillness, the sense of being suspended between places, between moments, belonging temporarily to neither. And then Claire Whitmore came back through the cabin. She moved through with purpose this time, not the loose, casual efficiency of the service rounds. This was different. Ethan's eyes tracked her from the moment she emerged from behind the galley curtain, and what he saw in her body language tightened something in his chest again, harder than before. She stopped at row 2. "Sir." Her voice was pleasant, still wearing the right tone. "I'm sorry to bother you. I just need to take a quick look at your boarding pass again." Mr. Hayes looked up. A small furrow appeared between his brows, not alarm, just mild confusion. He was a reasonable man who gave people the benefit of the doubt. "Of course," he said, reaching into his jacket's inner pocket. He produced the boarding pass and extended it toward her. She took it, looked at it, looked at the seat, looked back at it, and the pleasant expression tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "I see," she said, in a way that didn't mean she saw. in a way that meant the opposite. Is everything all right? Mr. Hayes asked. I just want to verify something in the system. She handed the boarding pass back, smiled that smile, and moved forward to the small galley area near the front of the cabin. She tapped at a screen for approximately 90 seconds. Then she came back. And this time, the pleasantness was thinner. Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to move to a different seat. A beat of silence. The kind that expands. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes said. This seat, she said with careful precision, has been assigned to another passenger. Mr. Hayes looked at his boarding pass, then back at her. Ma'am, this is seat 2A. My boarding pass says 2A. I boarded with this pass. It was scanned at the gate. I understand that, she said, in the tone people use when they are not interested in understanding anything. But there appears to have been an error in the system, and this seat has been allocated to a connecting passenger who will be boarding at our layover. I'm going to need to find you an alternative seat. Mr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Ethan recognized that quietness. He had seen it in his mother when situations at the hospital required her to hold herself in because the alternative, letting the full weight of what she was feeling out, would not serve anyone well. It was the quietness of a person exerting enormous internal effort. I purchased this ticket, Mr. Hayes said, carefully. First class. Months ago. I have the confirmation number. Sir, I don't doubt that you purchased a ticket. I'm telling you there has been a system discrepancy. Then I'd like to speak with someone who can check the system. If there's been an error, I'm happy to have it resolved. But until it is resolved, I would like to remain in the seat that I paid for. A pause. Something shifted in her posture. Barely. But Ethan saw it. I'll get my colleague, she said, and walked away. From row 5, Ethan sat up straighter. He was no longer pretending to look at anything else. He watched Mr. Hayes look down at his boarding pass, run his thumb along the edge of it, look out the window briefly, look back at the boarding pass. The man was composing himself, rebuilding his calm from the inside out, brick by brick, the way people do when they've had to do it many times before. Ethan's mother had taken one earbud out at some point during the exchange. She was watching too. Danielle Carter had 21 years of life experience that Ethan didn't yet have, but she and her son were processing the situation with the same read. She glanced at Ethan. He glanced at her. No words were needed. Claire returned with a second flight attendant, a younger woman who seemed mildly uncertain about her role in whatever this was. Claire pointed at the seat and said something low and quickly, and the second attendant's expression shifted into the particular blankness of someone deciding how uninvolved to be. She checked something on a small tablet. His ticket does check out, the second attendant said quietly to Claire. 2A, first class, confirmed. There's still an issue with the assignment, Claire said, without looking at her colleague. I'm not sure I see. Thank you, Ashley. I'll handle it from here. Ashley retreated, back to the galley, and Claire turned back to Mr. Hayes with that same carefully constructed expression of professional concern. Mr. Hayes, I understand this is frustrating, but I'm going to need your cooperation here. You have my cooperation, he said. You have the confirmation from your own system that this is my seat. I am cooperating fully. I am simply asking to stay in the seat I purchase. These things can sometimes be manipulated, she said. That sentence landed in the cabin like something dropped from a height. 3 nearby passengers who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. Mr. Hayes stared at her. Just for a moment, one unguarded moment, and in that moment Ethan saw the full weight of 68 years looking back at this woman. Not with anger, with something worse. With the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a specific type of weight for an entire lifetime and is utterly, profoundly tired of picking it up again. Excuse me, he said quietly. I'm not making any accusations, she said, quickly, smoothly. I'm simply saying that boarding documentation has been falsified before, and it is my responsibility to ensure. That man's documentation checked out, said a male voice from across the aisle. The man in the gray suit had closed his laptop. He was looking at Claire with flat eyes. Your colleague just confirmed it. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter between myself and... I heard exactly what you said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cabin had gone very still. The kind of still that happens when a group of strangers collectively realize they are all witnesses to the same thing. Mr. Hayes held himself very straight in his seat. His jaw was tight. His hands, flat on the armrests, were perfectly still in the way that hands are perfectly still when a person is working very hard to keep them that way. At 30,000 feet, in a sealed metal tube with nowhere to go, this was the moment where things could break in any direction. And this was the moment that Danielle Carter decided she was done being a quiet observer. She stood up from row 5. All 5 feet 7 inches of her, in her white and navy jacket, with the posture of a woman who had spent a career walking into rooms where things were going wrong and being the person who made them go right. "Excuse me," she said, moving up the aisle with measured steps. "I've been sitting here for the past 10 minutes watching this interaction, and I need to ask a very direct question." She stopped beside Mr. Hayes's row and looked at Claire Whitmore with the particular steadiness of someone who has learned exactly how to be the calmest person in the room. "This man has shown you a valid boarding pass. Your own system has confirmed his reservation. Can you tell me, specifically and clearly, on what basis you are continuing to ask him to vacate his seat?" Claire met Danielle's gaze. And Ethan, watching from the aisle now, because he had gotten up quietly at some point during his mother's walk forward, saw something happen in Claire Whitmore's eyes. A calculation. A reassessment. She was looking at Danielle and reconfiguring something. "Ma'am, if you could return to your seat." "I'm a nurse," Danielle said. "I'm trained to read people very accurately. And what I am reading right now is that this man has done nothing wrong and is being treated as though he has. I'm asking you to tell me why, or I'm asking you to leave him alone."
A beat.
"I am doing my job," Claire said.
Cold now.
The pleasantness entirely gone, replaced by a rigid professionalism that was somehow less convincing than the warmth had been. "Then do it correctly," Danielle said.
Simply.
And held her position. This standoff lasted 4 seconds, which is a very long time when no one is speaking. And then Claire said quietly, "I'll get the lead flight attendant," and turned and walked toward the front of the cabin with the precise speed of someone who wants to appear in control of a situation they have entirely lost control of. There was a collective exhale across first class. Mr. Hayes let out a long, slow breath. He looked up at Danielle, and his voice, when it came, was slightly rough at the edges in the way that voices get when a person has been holding something in for a long time.
"Thank you," he said.
"Don't thank me yet," she said, not unkindly. "We're not done." She was right, because 2 minutes later, the lead flight attendant appeared. A tall man, mid-50s, with the particular bearing of someone who has been managing crises in pressurized cabins for 30 years and has developed a permanent calm as a result. His name tag read, T. Morrison, lead attendant. Claire was right behind him, talking quickly and quietly, her hand gesturing toward the seat as they walked. He became agitated when I approached him. He's been disruptive to the other passengers. His documentation has not been satisfactorily verified. T. Morrison stopped in front of row 2. He looked at Mr. Hayes. "Good morning, sir. My name is Thomas Morrison. I'm the lead attendant on this flight. I understand there's been some confusion. Can you walk me through what's happened from your perspective?" And here is where it gets important, because Claire Whitmore, standing 2 feet to T. Morrison's left, clearly expected Mr. Hayes to be angry. Clearly expected him to say something that could be framed as disruptive. Clearly expected that the version of this story she had narrated on her walk back through the cabin would be confirmed by his response. What she was not prepared for was the quiet, precise, utterly composed account that Leonard Hayes gave. Date of purchase. Confirmation number. Gate scan. His boarding pass, produced and handed over without drama. His ID, following immediately after. Every detail laid out clearly and calmly, in order, with the measured competence of a man who had spent 4 decades managing complex systems and knew exactly how to present information. T. Morrison checked the boarding pass. Checked the ID. Checked the seat assignment on his tablet. He looked up. "Everything here is correct. You are in your assigned seat, Mr. Hayes." "That's what I've been saying," Mr. Hayes said. Quietly, without any satisfaction in it. Just the flat weight of someone saying a true thing that should not have needed saying. Morrison turned to Claire. And his face, which had been carefully neutral throughout, settled into an expression that was not neutral at all. I need to understand exactly what the basis for this complaint was, he said to her. I told you there was a discrepancy. Ashley verified his ticket 20 minutes ago and found no discrepancy. His voice was low, professional, but there was something beneath it that every person in that first-class cabin could hear clearly. I'm asking you again, what was the basis for this? Claire opened her mouth, and that was the moment Ethan stepped forward. I think I know what happened, he said. He said it quietly. He said it the way his mother had taught him to say things that mattered, without drama, without performance, simply and directly, as a statement of fact. He said it the way the truth says itself, when it has been patient long enough. Every eye in first class turned to the 10-year-old boy in the blue sweater and the slim black glasses standing in the aisle. Morrison looked at him. Young man? My name is Ethan Carter, he said. And I have a recording. Subscribe right now because what's on that recording is going to change everything. What Ethan captured on those glasses is something nobody on that plane was prepared for. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moment this all explodes. Speech balloon question for the comments. When Claire said these things can be manipulated, what did you feel in that moment? Be honest. Drop it below. The silence that followed those words, I have a recording, was the kind of silence that has texture to it. Morrison looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then he glanced at Danielle, who gave a single, brief nod that confirmed everything she needed to confirm. Then he looked back at the 10-year-old standing in the aisle with more composure than most adults he'd dealt with in 30 years in the air. Why don't we step forward a bit? Morrison said, gesturing toward the small open area near the galley, just forward of the first-class rows, where there was enough space to stand without blocking the aisle. They gathered there in a loose semicircle. Morrison.
Danielle.
Mr. Hayes, who had risen slowly from his seat with the careful movements of a man who is not entirely certain of the ground beneath him.
Ethan.
And Claire Whitmore, who had positioned herself slightly apart from the group, her arms folded once, then unfolded, then folded again at her waist. Walk me through the recording, Morrison said to Ethan. Ethan reached up and touched the arm of his glasses with 2 fingers. There was a small port on the left temple, barely visible unless you knew it was there, and he connected it to his phone with a short cable he pulled from his sweater pocket. The footage, synced automatically to his phone's app, was queued and waiting. The glasses record automatically when they're on, Ethan said, explaining this without defensiveness, simply stating the facts. They've been recording since we boarded. He held the phone out so Morrison could see the screen. He started the playback. And in the first-class cabin of Flight 447, everyone who could lean forward leaned forward. The recording was clear. Ethan's smart glasses had captured high-definition video from his eye level, lower than an adult's perspective, which turned out to be oddly significant, because it had captured angles and details that an adult standing in the same positions might have missed. It began with the boarding process. The gate. The jetway. Mr. Hayes taking his seat at 2A, settling in with that quiet deliberateness that Ethan had noticed and the camera had preserved perfectly. The pre-flight service. The drinks cart coming through. And then it captured something that nobody in that circle had yet discussed. Approximately 12 minutes into the flight, before the drink service, before Claire Whitmore had made her first approach to row 2, the recording showed her standing at the small fold-out station near the galley. She was facing away from the cabin, her back to the passengers, reviewing something on the attendant's terminal. And she was talking, quietly, with her mouth barely moving, in the way people talk when they don't want to be overheard but have not fully committed to silence. She was talking to Ashley, the second attendant. The glasses, with their directional audio pickup, had caught every word. That man in 2A, Claire said, her voice low and flat and completely unlike the practiced warmth she wore in the cabin, does not belong in that section. Ashley's voice, quieter still. His ticket is. I don't care what his ticket says. I've been doing this for 14 years, and I know when something is off. People like that don't just buy first-class tickets. They get upgraded. And he didn't come through the upgrade list. A pause. "Claire," Ashley began. "I'm going to handle it. Just follow my lead." The recording played on. Every person in that semicircle heard it. Crystal clear. No ambiguity. No room for alternate interpretation. Morrison's face had become very, very still. The cabin behind them had gone so quiet it was as though the air itself had stopped moving. Ethan tapped the screen to pause the playback. His phone hand was steady. He looked at Morrison and said, simply, "There's more." "She says it again later." Before the second time, she went back to his seat. "But I think that part is enough." Morrison did not respond immediately. He looked at the pause screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Claire Whitmore. Claire Whitmore had not moved. Her arms were still folded at her waist. Her expression had done something complicated, starting as shock, running through denial, landing somewhere in the vicinity of a person who has just realized that the position they have constructed for themselves is no longer tenable, but has not yet decided what to do about that. That's taken completely out of context," she said. Her voice was controlled. But it was the control of a person gripping something tightly, not the control of a person who is relaxed. "What I meant was..." "What did you mean?" Morrison said. And his voice carried something in it now that was very quiet and very serious and made the air in the galley area feel different. "I was concerned about a boarding irregularity. Your colleague confirmed his boarding pass before you made your second approach. The system confirmed his reservation. You had already been told, explicitly, that his documentation was valid. You went back anyway, and the recording from before your first approach makes your reasoning clear." He paused. "Very clear." Claire's jaw tightened. "I was acting in the best interest of..." "Mr. Hayes," Morrison said, turning away from her mid-sentence with a finality that was more devastating than any raised voice could have been. "I want to apologize to you on behalf of this airline. You have done nothing wrong. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, in the seat you paid for, and you should have been treated with the respect and courtesy that every single one of our passengers deserves." He paused. His voice was steady, but there was weight behind every word. "What happened here today was unacceptable, and it will not go unaddressed." Mr. Hayes looked at Morrison for a moment. His expression was complicated, the kind of complicated that 68 years makes a face. There was relief in it. There was something that might have been gratitude. But there was also something else, a particular weariness that relief cannot fully reach, that gratitude cannot entirely dissolve. The weariness of a man for whom this is not the first time, for whom this, in some form or another, has been a feature of his entire life. "I just want to enjoy my flight," he said finally, quietly. "That's all I ever wanted today." "You will," Morrison said. And he meant it. He turned back to Claire. He said something to her in a voice low enough that the cabin could not hear. What they could see was that she nodded once, stiffly, and then moved with contained, rigid steps back through the curtain toward the rear of the plane. She did not return to the first-class section for the remainder of the flight. Later, when the plane landed in Chicago and passengers were gathering their belongings, Danielle would speak briefly with Morrison at the front of the cabin. He would give her a card with the airline's formal complaint number and the specific incident reference code he had already logged. He would tell her that under the airline's protocol, formal recordings of the incident, including Ethan's footage, which he had asked them to preserve, would be submitted to HR and the chief operations team. He would tell her, in the measured language of a professional who is choosing his words very carefully, that this was not the first complaint. But that comes later. Right now, in this moment, in the galley of Flight 447 30,000 feet above the American South, something important was happening. Morrison had stepped away to make some calls. Danielle was standing near the galley entrance, watching everything with those nurses' eyes that missed nothing. The passengers in first class had returned, gradually, to the surface appearance of going about their business, though the cabin had the particular quality of a room in which everyone is very aware of everyone else. And Ethan Carter walked back to row 2 and looked at Mr. Leonard Hayes. The man was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, looking out the window. The clouds were still there below them, white and immovable and indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 40 minutes. He looked up when Ethan stopped beside his row. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Ethan was 10 years old, and this man was 68 years old, and between those two numbers was an entire ocean of experience that neither of them could fully explain to the other. But they sat in that gap for a moment without trying to bridge it, and somehow that was okay. "Those are good glasses," Mr. Hayes said finally. Ethan almost smiled. "Yeah. Your mother teach you to do that? Stay calm like that." "Yes, sir." Mr. Hayes nodded slowly. "Smart woman. She says the truth doesn't shout," Ethan said. "It waits." Something shifted in the old man's face. Something opened up just briefly, the way it had at the gate. That unguarded expression, that moment of pure feeling that had nowhere else to go. And then it settled, and he looked at Ethan with eyes that were clear and direct and very kind. "You know what the hardest part of getting older is?" he said. Ethan shook his head. "You stop being surprised." He looked out the window again. "But today," he paused. "Today I was surprised." Ethan nodded. He wasn't entirely sure he understood everything that meant, but he thought he understood enough. He went back to his seat. His mother squeezed his hand once when he sat down. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The clouds moved past the window in their slow, enormous procession. The plane flew on. Belle, if you made it this far, you are exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe right now. The next part of the story is where everything becomes bigger than one flight, bigger than one airline. Don't miss it. Speech balloon. When Ethan played that recording, what was going through your mind? What would you have done in that cabin? Tell us below. The plane landed at O'Hare at 11:47 a.m. By midnight, the video was everywhere. It hadn't started with a plan. Danielle Carter was not an influencer. She didn't have a content strategy or a posting schedule or a ring light. She had a phone and a mother's instinct, not for virality, but for record keeping, for documentation, for making sure that the things that happened in sealed spaces where witnesses could be ignored did not get to stay sealed. She had transferred the footage from Ethan's glasses to her phone on the flight, with T. Morrison's blessing and his incident reference number already typed into her notes. She had called her sister from the arrivals hall while Ethan was in the bathroom, and her voice had cracked once, just once, in the middle of explaining what had happened, before she pulled herself back together and finished the sentence. And then she had sat down on a bench near the baggage carousel and typed a caption. Not long, not dramatic, not written for an algorithm. She wrote, "My 10-year-old son watched an elderly black man be humiliated in first class for the crime of sitting in a seat he paid for." Ethan recorded the whole thing, including what she said when she thought no one was listening. "His name is Mr. Leonard Hayes. He deserved better. We all do." She attached the clip, 2 minutes and 43 seconds, which included the audio of Claire's conversation with Ashley and the subsequent confrontation, all captured from Ethan's glasses with merciless, undeniable clarity, and she posted it. And then she went to find her son. What happened next moved with the speed that only things on the internet can move, and which still manages to surprise people every time. Within the first 2 hours, the post had been shared 900 times. By the third hour, the numbers had gone past counting in any meaningful way. It was being picked up by accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. Someone had clipped the audio, just Claire's voice saying people like that don't just buy first-class tickets, and posted it as a standalone 10-second clip that circulated separately, viewed 3 million times by the end of the first day. By morning, it was on the news. Not the local news. The national news. The kind where a photograph of Mr. Hayes, taken from an old community newsletter about his retirement from the Memphis Water Authority, was being displayed on screens in living rooms across the country, his face calm and dignified above a chiron that read, "Airline passenger targeted in alleged racial bias incident. Child's smart glasses capture full exchange." The airline's social media team woke up to 40,000 direct messages. Their initial response, a standard template about taking all concerns seriously and committing to thorough internal review, was posted at 6:43 a.m. It received 22,000 comments in the first hour, the vast majority of which were not kind. By 9 a.m., they had taken it down and replaced it with a statement that was longer, more specific, and had clearly been written by someone with a legal team standing immediately behind them. It acknowledged the incident. It acknowledged the recording. It confirmed that the employee in question had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. It expressed, in language that was careful and measured, and arrived approximately 18 hours too late, profound regret for Mr. Hayes' experience. Mr. Hayes himself did not see any of this in real time. He had arrived at his college roommate's house in Evanston the previous evening, and they had eaten dinner and talked for a long time, and he had gone to bed earlier than usual with a tiredness that was not just physical. His phone had been on silent. When he woke up in the morning and turned it on, he had 47 missed calls. His daughter, calling from Memphis, got through on the 48th. She was crying before he could finish saying hello. "Daddy," she kept saying. "Daddy, do you know what's happening? Do you know?"
He didn't yet.
She told him. And while she talked, he sat on the edge of the guest bed in his old friend's house, in his pajamas, and he listened to his daughter's voice telling him that the country knew his name, that people were angry on his behalf, that somewhere in Atlanta a woman named Danielle Carter and her son Ethan had made sure that what happened to him on that plane did not get to disappear. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "Are you okay, Daddy?" "I'm thinking," he said. What he was thinking was complicated. He was thinking about Gloria, because he was always thinking about Gloria and what she would say about this. He was thinking that she would be furious, the kind of righteous, burning fury that she had always been better at than him, that had always been one of the things he loved most about her. He was thinking that she would also, somewhere underneath the fury, be deeply moved. Because she had believed, steadily and stubbornly across all their years together, that goodness existed and surfaced, and that the people who decided to stand up mattered. He was thinking about a 10-year-old boy who had decided to have proof, who had been prepared, quietly, without drama, for exactly this kind of moment, who had stood in an airplane aisle with steady hands and said, "I have a recording," in the same tone he would have said, "I have a pencil." He was thinking about what it means to be seen. Not the viral version of being seen, not the numbers, not the news segment, not the cheering above his face on a national broadcast, but the other kind, the kind that happens in the moment, person to person, when someone decides that what is happening in front of them matters enough to do something about it. The kind that Danielle Carter had chosen when she stood up from row 5. The kind that Ethan had chosen before the flight even began. "Tell those people I'm grateful," he said finally to his daughter. "Tell them what they did matters." She promised she would. The internet, meanwhile, had opinions about Claire Whitmore. This is the part of the story that is complicated in a different way. Within 24 hours of the video going viral, she had been identified by name. Her employer's name was known. Her professional history was being excavated in comment sections and subthreads and group chats. People who said they had flown with her before began appearing in replies, describing other interactions that sounded, in their telling, like variations on a theme. A pattern was being assembled in public, in real time, by thousands of strangers who had never been in the same room. The airline, by the second day, had confirmed that the investigation had been expanded from a single incident review to a broader examination of complaint records. They would not confirm specific details. A spokesperson gave a brief statement outside their corporate headquarters in which she said the word values 4 times in 3 sentences. A journalist asked whether there had been prior complaints against this specific employee. The spokesperson said she could not comment on personnel matters and asked if there were any other questions. There were several hundred other questions. The footage kept spreading. It crossed into international coverage. In France, in Brazil, in South Africa, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in places where the specifics of American racial history played out differently on screens, but the core of the thing translated completely. The clip circulated. People watched a woman with a polished smile stand over a dignified old man and tell him, in 5 different directions at once, that he did not belong. And people watched a small boy in glasses step into an aisle and say, quietly, that he had proof. And in their hundreds of millions of separate lives, in their separate languages and contexts and histories, people recognized both of those things. The harm and the intervention. The way power arranges itself to be invisible and the specific, irreducible act of making it visible. Ethan Carter, who was in Chicago visiting his grandmother and eating her chicken and watching cartoons, had become, without seeking it, without planning it, without even fully understanding it yet, something that the internet briefly decided it needed: proof that small people with clear eyes can shift enormous things. His mother fielded 17 interview requests in the first 48 hours. She accepted none of them immediately. She sat with Ethan on his grandmother's couch and showed him what was happening online and answered his questions carefully and honestly, and did not let him see the parts that were ugly, because there were ugly parts, because there always are, and she asked him how he felt. He thought about it for a while. "I feel like the truth waited," he said. And then it stepped forward. She pulled him close and held him for a moment. Outside, Chicago was gray and cold and enormous, and somewhere across the country on a national news ticker, his name was still scrolling. Belle, we're almost at the end of this story, and what Ethan says in the final moments is going to stay with you for a long time. Subscribe now so you never miss a story that matters. Speech balloon: when you heard that the footage had gone viral, did you feel justice was served? Or do you think more needs to happen? Tell us exactly what you think below. 3 days after the flight, Leonard Hayes sat in a window seat. Not an airplane window. The window of his college roommate's kitchen in Evanston, Illinois, overlooking a small backyard where a bird feeder swung gently in the November wind, and a cardinal sat on the fence with the absolute stillness of something that does not know it is being watched and therefore has no reason to perform. He had a cup of coffee. Real coffee, in a real mug, not the in-flight variety. His phone was face down on the table. The news alerts had been silenced. He had agreed, through his daughter, to speak with one journalist, a single long-form interview, in his own time, on his own terms, but that was next week. Right now, there was just the coffee and the cardinal and the wind moving the bird feeder and the particular silence of a morning that belongs entirely to you. He was thinking about Gloria again. He thought she would have gotten on every single talk show. She would have said exactly what needed to be said, clearly and without apology, and she would have looked beautiful doing it, and she would have made people uncomfortable in the best possible way, the way she always had. She had never understood why he was so careful with his words, why he was so measured, why he was always building toward the point instead of just making it. She used to say, "Lenny, sometimes you have to just say the thing." He smiled at the cardinal. The thing was this: what happened on that plane was not a single incident. It was not an aberration. It was not a system error or a misunderstanding or an isolated moment of one person's bad judgment. It was a continuation. A long, long continuation of a specific story about who is presumed to belong in certain spaces and who is not. About which bodies in which seats trigger, which instincts in which people. About the 1,000 invisible ways that presumption operates on a daily basis in the life of a person who wears the skin and has worn it for 68 years and will wear it until the end. He had not said any of this on the plane. He had been polite. He had been measured. He had shown his boarding pass 4 times when once should have been more than sufficient. Because that is what you learn to do. That is the specific, exhausting skill that nobody asks you to learn but everyone requires you to have. And still, it had taken a 10-year-old boy to make the truth visible. That was the part he kept returning to. Not with bitterness. He had examined it for bitterness and found surprisingly little, but with something closer to wonder. A child. A child who had decided that the world required proof and had prepared himself to provide it. A child whose mother had taught him that calm is not the same as surrender, and that the truth, if you wait for it, will step forward. A child who had stood in an airplane aisle at 30,000 feet and been, simply, exactly, completely unafraid. He thought, what does it take to raise a person like that? He thought, what would the world look like if more people had decided, at 10 years old, to be prepared? Not armed, not angry, prepared, present, paying attention. He thought, there are children like that everywhere. There have always been children like that everywhere. The question is whether the world they're growing up in makes room for what they see, or whether it teaches them, slowly and persistently, to stop seeing it. He thought, I am not going to let this become only a news cycle. I am not going to let my face on a cheer-in be the whole of what happened on that plane. Because the whole of what happened on that plane was a small boy deciding that what was happening in front of him mattered enough to act. That is the part that needs to be said clearly and remembered past the 48-hour window of outrage. That is the inheritance worth preserving. The cardinal on the fence turned its head sharply, considering something invisible in the air, and then flew away in a flash of red that was startling and gone. Mr. Hayes watched the empty space where it had been for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee. He said, to the window, to the empty yard, to Gloria, to no one and everyone, "You were watching, weren't you?"
It was not a question.
On the same morning, in Atlanta, Ethan Carter was getting ready for school. He had been back from Chicago for one day. The internet was still doing what the internet does, cycling and churning, and moving on to the next thing in the breathless, continuous scroll that is the news cycle, and somewhere in that scroll his name and his face and his glasses were being processed into distance. By next week, it would be less. By the week after, most people would have moved on. But that was fine. That had never been the point. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, picked up his glasses, put them on. They looked exactly like regular glasses.
Slim.
Understated. Nothing remarkable. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. A 10-year-old in a blue sweater and glasses, hair neat, backpack sitting on the bathroom floor. An ordinary Tuesday morning. An ordinary kid. Almost. He thought about Mr. Hayes, the way he had looked sitting in that window seat before everything started. The quiet wonder on his face. The checked ticket held in both hands. He thought about what his mother had said when they were packing to come home, when he had asked her if he had done the right thing. She had looked at him very directly, the way she looked at things she wanted him to remember. And she said, "You did exactly what being prepared is for. Not to cause trouble, not to be a hero, just to make sure the truth had somewhere to land." He thought about that phrase. A place to land. The truth needed a place to land. Without one, it just fell through the air and nobody caught it, and eventually everyone agreed they hadn't seen anything.
He had been a place to land.
He picked up his backpack. He walked to the kitchen. His mother was at the counter with her own coffee, already in her scrubs for the morning shift, and she looked at him when he came in with those nurse's eyes that assessed everything immediately and filed it accurately. "Ready?" she said. "Yeah," he said. She studied him for one more second. Then she nodded. They left the house together in the early morning, the door closing behind them with the soft, definitive sound of a regular day beginning. The street was quiet. The sky was just starting to go from gray to pale gold. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once, and then was silent. Ethan walked beside his mother. His glasses caught the morning light. The tiny indicator on the left temple was dark, not recording, just present, just waiting. Ready. The way a place to land is always ready. And he thought about one more thing. The thing that had stayed with him the most, tucked quietly under everything else that had happened. When he had stepped into the aisle and said, "I think I know what happened," and the whole cabin had turned to look at him, this small kid, this unremarkable-looking 10-year-old standing there in his sweater and his glasses, there had been a moment. Half a second, maybe less, before anyone responded. A moment where he had felt, very clearly, the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't afraid. That was the thing he kept noticing, kept turning over. He wasn't afraid. Not because he was brave in the dramatic sense. Not because he had planned this specific moment. But because he had been prepared for the kind of moment where this could happen. He had practiced being calm. He had been taught that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. He had spent months wearing glasses that meant he would never have to say, "I didn't catch that," or "I can't prove it," or "nobody saw." They had thought no one was watching. But someone was. And that is the thing about paying attention. The real, sustained, unhurried, prepared kind of attention that starts before the crisis and waits with quiet patience through all the ordinary moments until the moment that isn't ordinary arrives. The kind of attention that most people stop practicing because the world is tiring and there is always something else to look at. The thing about that kind of attention is this. It changes everything. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not the way explosions change things, or the way arguments change things, or the way viral moments change things, bright and hot and gone in a week. Slowly. The way light changes things. The way a child changes things. The way a small voice in an airplane aisle carrying a truth that had been waiting patiently for exactly the right moment to step forward, changes the air in an entire cabin, changes the expression on one old man's face, changes what dozens of strangers on a plane decide they witnessed and what they decide to say about it. The way one decision, to pay attention, to be prepared, to wait for the truth to need a place to land, can travel out from a single person in ways that are impossible to fully map or measure or predict. Ethan Carter was 10 years old. He walked to school on a Tuesday morning in Atlanta. His glasses caught the light, and the truth had somewhere to land. Well, if this story moved you, if Ethan and Mr. Hayes and Danielle made you feel something real, please subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this only reach the people who need them when you help carry them. Hit subscribe and hit share. Speech balloon final question. What do you want to take from Ethan's story? What does it make you want to do differently in your own life, in your own moments? We read every single comment.
Tell us.